Crackanory, Too Cracked for TV. The Egg That Knew Too Much by Steve Burge. Read by Toby Jones.
Eggs, eggs, eggs. Ted Kebble loved eggs. He always started the day off with one of the tasty oval buggers, or chicken bombs, as he humorously called them when no one was listening. They were one of his little pleasures in life. One particular morning, Ted sat at the table with his breakfast egg, softly boiled to perfection, and as usual, he used his spoon to crack open its shell to get to the moorish, eggy flesh. That's when Ted noticed something very strange. Sitting in the runny yolk, staring back at him, was a tiny piece of paper, rolled up like a miniature scroll. Weird. How did that get in there? Ted thought to himself. He checked the underside of the egg. No cracks or holes or anything. Ted couldn't work out how a tiny scroll could have been sneaked inside his boiled beauty. It was impossible. Ted fished the piece of paper out and unrolled it. He squinted. On the note was a message. It read, "Nancy's Delight will win the 3:30 at Epsom today." Ted shrugged, screwed up the note, threw it in the bin, and thought no more of it. That afternoon, after finishing his errands, Ted returned home. He made himself a cuppa and flicked through the TV channels, but he stopped when he came to the horse racing. His eyes bulged like big bewildered pillows, and he dropped the TV remote in his hot beverage. Ted couldn't believe what he was seeing. Nancy's Delight had won the 3:30 at Epsom, at odds of 60-1, just like the note inside his egg told him it would. Why didn't he put a bet down? He could have been rich. Ted went to bed that night with the right grumps, still rueing his missed opportunity. The next morning, Ted had cheered up a bit. He boiled himself another egg as he pondered what to do on such a bright, sunny day. Maybe I should go to the cemetery, or feed the crows. Ted cracked open his egg with impeccable technique and precision. He peered inside. To his utter astonishment, there was another note inside. Ted retrieved the note with his bony fingers. The new note read, "This week's winning Euro lottery numbers are 7, 15, 20, 32, and 37. Ted wasn't going to make the same mistake again. He popped his trousers on, ran to the newsagent, and bought himself a lottery ticket. That night, Ted took his trousers off and waited with anticipation in front of the telly. Finally, the announcer read out the Euro Million results. Tonight's winning numbers are 7, 15, 20, 32, and 37. Ted leapt off the sofa and rolled around the floor in celebration. He'd won the jackpot. He was an overnight millionaire, all thanks to a beautiful, beautiful egg. But it didn't stop there. Every morning a new egg, a new note, each one containing next week's football results, competition answers, stock prices, and more. And Ted acted on everything the eggs told him. Ted couldn't believe it. Each egg-based prediction was a winner. He was raking in the big bucks. Ted's lucky streak became big news, making him a bit of a celebrity. He was hanging out with movers and shakers, VIP superstars like Matt Cardle, Ainsley Harriott, and Gabby Roslin. Life was good. But with celebrity came suspicion. No one could be that lucky. He must be cheating somehow. The rumours about Ted started circulating, especially after he won the lottery 4 weeks in a row. But as much as they tried, nobody could prove any wrongdoing. And in interviews, when asked how he did it, Ted lied, "Well, it's just intuition, a gut feeling. I suppose you could call it a Midas touch. Does that make me a genius? I don't know. You tell me, but yes, I think it does. Ted was now a billionaire, but it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He got a rush every time he cracked open another egg and found a note. It was an amazing feeling, like an inside-out tickle sneeze. It was then that Ted started to get paranoid. What if someone found out about his eggy secret? What if someone else bought their eggs from the same place as him? What if they found messages inside their eggs too? What if they got rich? Richer than him? No, they were his eggs. No one else would have them. Ted rushed to the corner shop where he bought his eggs. He gave Samid, the shop owner, a large bag of cash, and the two men came to an arrangement. From now on, you'll only sell eggs to me. As the weeks passed, the notes kept coming, and the eggs made Ted richer and richer. People began to notice how the wealth had started to change Ted. He became cocky and arrogant. He stopped taking the bus as he thought it was beneath him. He got his ear pierced. He dressed in polo necks and gold-plated shoes. He'd even made Ainsley Harriott cry with a catty put-down. But Ted didn't care what people thought of him. He had his eggs, and that was all he needed. But then, one morning, things changed. Ted sat down and cracked open his egg as usual, and like always there was a note inside. But this note was different. Very different. It read, "Stuart Cogger will die today at 4 p.m. Ted was disappointed. What was he meant to do with that information? It couldn't make him richer, and he didn't know anyone called Stuart Cogger, so what did he care? Ted binned the note and tried to forget all about it. But he couldn't. As the hours passed, guilt slowly ate away at him. The eggs never lied. Whoever Stuart Cogger was, he was in danger, and Ted was the only one who could save him. The responsibility weighed down on him. He had to do something. Ted leapt into action. He went through the phone book and started ringing every Stuart Cogger he could. He searched Facebook for Stuart Coggers and wrote them a warning message, but there were just too many Stuart Coggers. He couldn't reach them all, and he had no idea which one was the Stuart Cogger in danger. As the clock reached 4 o'clock, there were still hundreds of Stuart Coggers Ted hadn't contacted. All he could do was pray that he'd done enough. But as Ted watched the evening news, the newscaster said the words he'd been dreading. In other news, a man was killed earlier today in what police are calling a freak accident. At around 4 p.m., Stuart Cogger, 37, was run over by an out-of-control milk float. But the thing that's baffling everyone about the accident is that Mr. Cogger was upstairs in a second-floor bathroom at the time. The deathly premonitions didn't stop there. With each day, Ted's egg predicted someone else would die. Ted was frantic. He would try his best to find the egg's latest victim and warn them, but he never could. One day it would be a businessman in Hull who drowned after getting his head stuck in the toilet. Another day it would be a housewife in Basildon who died from a fatal bout of flatulence. Someone always died. As a last resort, a slightly unhinged Ted went on daytime magazine program Loose Women. His plan was to tell people the truth about his lucky predictions and hopefully save lives. But as soon as Ted said, "My eggs tell me the future," there was hysterical audience laughter, and Ted became an instant laughingstock. A big, eggy joke. No one was going to take anything else, he said seriously. Ted wasn't even given a chance to speak further. He was jeered out of the Loose Women studio like an egg-bothering crackpot. Humiliated, Ted retreated to his mansion. He was at breaking point. He couldn't take the stress of knowing someone would die any more. With no other option, he did the unthinkable. Ted stopped having his morning egg. As day after eggless day passed, Ted became a recluse. He stopped washing, shaving, and grew long fingernails. He wore nothing but a soiled dressing gown and a nappy made of tin foil. He'd even resorted to peeing in empty mayonnaise jars and eating soup out of a gold-plated shoe. But as much as he tried, Ted couldn't ignore the yearning inside him. Just one more egg. They whispered their eggy siren song into his ear, tempting him, seducing him. And who knew? Maybe this time it wouldn't predict someone's death. Maybe it would predict the winner of this year's X Factor, or whether it would be a white Christmas. Ted couldn't fight it any longer. He fired up the hob and cooked himself a scrumptious soft-boiled egg. He nervously cracked it open, removed its top, and peered inside. There was a note. Ted's hand shook as he reached down and pulled the note out. He took a deep breath, unrolled the paper, and read the message. But nothing could have prepared him for what it said. In exactly 1 week's time, at 6:30 p.m., you will die. No, it couldn't be. Ted was a billionaire. He was living the dream. Granted, it had turned into a dream where he peed in jars and wore a tin-foil nappy to stop evil Wi-Fi signals going up his bum-bum, but a dream nonetheless. Now the egg was telling him he was going to pop his gold-plated clogs. It wasn't fair. He was too rich to die. Ted thought, longer and harder than he'd ever thought before. There must be a way to stop the prophecy coming true, a way to beat it. First of all, he had to find out where these mysterious future-predicting eggs came from. Ted returned to the corner shop and asked Samid where he got his eggs. Samid put Ted in contact with the cash and carry, who in turn put Ted in contact with the wholesalers. The wholesalers, in turn, put him in touch with a farmer's market, who then put him in touch with a mysterious bloke called Jeff, who lived in a lighthouse. Jeff sent word by falcon to an acquaintance in Africa. His acquaintance sent a falcon back. The message it carried told Ted to track down a wise Nigerian witch doctor. The witch doctor, in turn, put Ted in touch with a foot doctor in Luton. The foot doctor asked his 12-year-old daughter, Polly, who then helpfully looked on the internet and found the address of the egg farm. Ted began his journey. He left his safe little world behind and soon found himself in a savage land. As he cut his way through the undergrowth, Ted could hear the distant howling of wolves and blood-curdling screams. He was scared. He'd never travelled this far into deepest, darkest Ipswich before. Through the mist, Ted stumbled across a ferry boatman. His body all bent and ugly, his face hideous, wrinkled and grotesque. For some reason, it reminded Ted that he should call his mother more often. After crossing his palm with silver, the ferry boatman took Ted across the water to a small island in the middle of the lake. Ted disembarked the ferry boatman's vessel and stepped onto the island. From there, Ted followed a muddy pathway, crossed a rickety bridge, and before he knew it, he was stood outside the spine-chillingly spooky premises of Sinister Eggs Limited. Ted pulled on the doorbell and waited for the huge metal front doors to slowly creak open. Finally, he was face to face with the owners of Sinister Eggs Limited. The creepy, the diabolical, but overall quite helpful Barry Sinister and his wife, Pat. Ted told the Sinisters all about his eggy nightmare. He demanded answers. Why was this happening to him? The Sinisters informed Ted that the egg farm was built over supernatural ley lines, that in folklore are the exact coordinates of the mouth of hell. Hence, it is foretold, every egg that is laid there is cursed. Or as Barry explained it, I mean, they're fine to eat, taste all right, they're just a little bit evil. Ted begged to know if there was any way to break the egg's curse. Barry and Pat whispered to each other as they had a private conversation. Finally, Pat turned to Ted and said, "There is one way, but to earn the right to learn that knowledge, you must first go on an epic quest." What kind of quest?" asked Ted. The Sinisters explained to Ted that on his quest he must bring back the adrenaline glands of a rare frog that can only be found where the swinging gardens of Babylon once stood. Bring back a silver chalice containing water from the fountain of eternal youth. Break into the mythical realm and battle a fearsome minotaur. And get Daley Thompson's autograph. After he'd done all that stuff, Ted returned with his bounty. But by the way Barry and Pat disregarded the frog glands and silver chalice, he'd started to suspect that all they ever really wanted was Daley Thompson's autograph. Barry Sinister declared that Ted was ready to hear the one and only way to beat the egg prophecy. Ted himself must eat the chicken that laid the very egg that predicted his death, every bit of the chicken. Only then would the curse be broken. Ted looked around. There were over 1,000 chickens inside the egg farm, and no clue which one laid the important egg. Ted had no other option. He had to buy all the chickens. But the Sinisters weren't interested. They declined his offer. Still, Ted wouldn't give up. This time he offered to buy the whole egg farm and its contents. But the Sinisters declined again. Eggs were their life. They wouldn't sell for any price. "I'll give you 100 billion pounds. Here's the keys. It's all yours." Mr. and Mrs. Sinister couldn't believe their luck. They handed over the deeds to the egg farm and scarpered before Ted had a chance to change his mind. Ted was penniless again, but he didn't care. It was now only 48 hours to the dreaded 6:30 deadline. Ted had 2 days to single-handedly eat over 1,000 chickens and save his life. Ted tucked into his one-man mission, chomping away like a man possessed. It was painful, grueling, and very greasy. The clock kept ticking. Ted couldn't cook the chickens fast enough. He started eating them raw, ripping off their feathers with his teeth and spitting them out like a rabid animal. Time was running out, but Ted wouldn't quit. He was consuming more chicken than any other man in human history. The final hour whizzed by. Before he knew it, there was only 2 minutes left. Ted, all grey, bloated and clammy, suffering with the meat sweats, twisted his bulbous frame in his chair and checked how much chicken was left to eat. There was only one piece. One little piece. Ted couldn't believe it. He was going to do it. He was going to beat the curse. Ted squashed the clump of raw meat into his mouth and chewed with all his might. All he had to do now was swallow, and he was free. But just then, a solitary chicken feather wafted through the room and landed on Ted's nose. It tickled his dainty little nostrils. Ted's nose twitched. The feather made him want to sneeze. He tried to fight it, but he couldn't. As Ted began to sneeze, he involuntarily inhaled, sucking a large chunk of meat, bone, and possibly beak down into his windpipe. Ted fell to his knees as he started to choke. Struggling for air, Ted tried to shout for help, but no sound came out. He then tried to grab his phone, but It was out of his reach. There was nothing he could do. As Ted choked to death, he looked at the time on the clock. It was exactly 6:30 p.m. Eggs, the only thing Ted had ever loved, had turned against him. And it was in those final moments Ted Kebble suddenly knew the horrifying truth. Whatever you do, the egg always wins. So, the next time you have a hankering for a lovely boiled egg, remember, it's not just the cholesterol that kills you in an egg, but fear of the egg itself. Also, salmonella. Expect the unexpected.